Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann, and today we are thrilled to welcome someone who starred in some of the most fun films of my youth, such as Night of the Comet, The Last Starfighter, Weekend at Bernie's, as well as originating the role of Kayla Brady on Days of Our Lives. Please help us welcome Catherine Mary Stewart. Catherine, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi there. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, to start with, I was reading, and if this is true, I want to find out that you spend a good amount of time living in my hometown of Brooklyn. So I got to know whereabouts.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, we were in Dumbo. We had the best address. It was 1 Main Street.
Oh, no.
Really?
Yeah. Isn't that the coolest? I just loved having that address more than almost anything else. But it was a beautiful, it's actually kind of an iconic building. You see it in a lot of Woody Allen movies and things like that when he's sort of panning, across the Brooklyn Bridge. It's right in between the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge, and it has that big clock tower.
I know.
Yeah, it's right on the water. It was a great building. We were only there for I don't know, maybe 3 years, and we were renting, and the owners lived in London, and they decided they decided they were going to move back, and we didn't expect it. We were hoping to be there longer, so we had to sort of scramble and find a new place to live, but we loved it. It was beautiful because we could just see the whole, all of downtown Manhattan from our window and over the East River. It was, and then the Brooklyn Bridge, and it was wonderful. It was a really cool place to live.
Wow. Well, that sounds like it. Well, you grew up in Canada. At what age did you start showing an interest in the performing arts?
It's funny because I usually start with, well, my mom got me into dancing when I was 7, but I reflecting back on those days, I sort of come from this very animated family. We're not necessarily in show business. My dad was a professor at the university, and the first time I saw him lecture, I realized where I got that gene from, because he was a real performer. He was not one of these boring sort of lecturers. He performed, he was a biologist, and, discussing why birds have beaks and things. And he'd literally stick his head under an overhead projector to sort of show that lips don't really work the way birds need them to work, and things like that. I'm like, oh, I get it now. but there was always a lot of singing and music in the house, and we were all very animated. You get us together as a family, and it's just nonstop laughing and joking and sort of inside jokes. And both my husband and my brother's partner at the time, they were just like, okay, we need to take a break, and they would leave, and we'd be like, so I feel like I was born with it. Let me put it, long story short, I feel like I was kind of born with it. I do come up from a family of academics, so there was a sort of high expectation of that kind of thing, which I never fell into that niche at all on any level whatsoever.
Did they expect you to go into that? Did they want you to go into that?
They just, I don't really think they had expectations or anything like that, or that my children have to be academics. But it was sort of the world that they knew. And so when I wasn't an honor student in school, for instance, I found school kind of boring, and I just did, and regimented and all that other stuff. I think that was confusing for them, but I have to give, this is where I give my mother all the credit, all of it, which took me a long time to realize because I fought her all the way. When I was like 7, or 6 or something, she put me in a ballet class because I was very small, skinny little girl, the perfect sort of ballet dancer's body. I had very pointy toes and all that stuff. But again, I didn't like it because it was so regimented. It wasn't fun. It was just like first position, second position, third position. And I was like, oh boy, this is really dull. I just want to be on stage leaping around. And so that didn't last very long. She got me then into gymnastics. My mother was constantly trying to figure out where I fit, which I'm just so impressed by, because her resilience and diligence is just, it's amazing to me. She got me into art class, which is me. She got me into gymnastics. I enjoyed gymnastics. It was fun. And then when I was in junior high school, she was like, you know, you in Canada, we had your regular classes that you had to take. And then there were options. They called them options. And there would be like health class or drama or music or something like that. And I was like, I'll do health. And my mother was like, why don't you try drama? And I was like, I am not standing in front of a whole bunch of people and reciting Shakespeare or something like that. At any rate, she talked me into it. So I grudgingly signed up for drama class. And I mean, it took me about one class to realize, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. I felt so comfortable, and it was nothing like what I expected. I loved every second of it. And then when I was around the same time, my mother read about this new jazz dance teacher who had been training in Paris and was back in Edmonton to teach these classes. And she said, why don't you try that? I'm like, I'm not standing in front of a whole bunch of people and dancing. And it took me about one class again to go, once again, I found home. And it was sort of, it was weird because I made a deal with her. I was like, I'll go to one class and I'll see if I like it. And if I don't, then I'm never going again, because I hated ballet. She's like, no, okay, that's fine. I mean, my mother was not like, oh, okay, not at all. She was completely the opposite. My mother was a driven, a woman way beyond her time, for sure. Anyway, she agreed to that. And I parked myself sort of in the back of the class, and we did the class. And like halfway through, the teacher had me come up to the front because I was picking up on whatever it was she was doing. She said, I want you to stand in front of everybody so they can watch you. And I'm like, gulp. But it just, again, kind of opened this new world to me. And I never looked back. You know, it became my life, dance. I did really love acting as well, but with this particular, her name was Jill McDonald. She created a company called Synergy, which I was one of the youngest members of. We ended up traveling literally all over the world. The first time I performed professionally on stage in this company was like an out-of-body experience for me. I literally emotionally broke down sobbing because it just was, it was one of those bizarro things that you hear about every once in a while, but that's truly how I felt. It's what I needed to do.
I'm curious.
So that was the beginning of my performing career.
Well, did you have any particular performers that you like influenced you growing up, like that, you know, you looked up to, or that who were some of your favorites?
It's so funny because I never sort of went along thinking about all this stuff, but it's like it's taken me this long to sort of look back and go, oh, that makes so much sense. I mean, 50 years later. One of my favorite movies was Jesus Christ Superstar.
Oh, yay. So glad to hear somebody say that. I love that movie ever since I was a kid.
Me too.
Sorry, I had to interject.
No, for sure. I mean, truly, I think there's a fan base that is just undeniable with that movie. But at first I thought, like, my parents were being academics, and we church was not a huge thing for us. So it was like when we went to Sunday school when we were kids. At one point, my parents sort of said, is this something you really want to do on Sunday mornings? They asked us, and we're like, no. You mean get up really early in the morning, go to Sunday school, and come home and be starving to death, because we always had brunch on Sunday, so it'd be after Sunday school. So we all sort of opted out of Sunday school, and that was kind of the end of basically my religious training. So when I saw Jesus Christ Superstar, I was like, oh, that's what the story is. Oh, now it makes sense to me. But what I really loved about it, on top of all that, was the dance and the music.
Mm-hmm.
I just loved it. And then I was, then, like, I don't know if you remember the movie Turning Point with it was about a ballet dancer, and I loved that movie. I loved that movie Fame. And I didn't even really understand why I loved them so much until like a year ago. It just was something I really connected to, was all those sort of music / dance movies.
So, I mean, and then, okay,
Musicals.
after high school, you moved to London to study performing arts. I mean, what made you decide to make such a bold move? And were you nervous about going to another country to study?
Well, in my family, we had traveled a lot growing up. I mean, we traveled all over the world growing up. So I was comfortable with the concept of travel. And we'd been to London as a family, and I have a lot of relatives there. So that was kind of a comfort zone for me. And when I graduated from high school, I knew I didn't want to go to university. So I actually, again, I believe it was my mother, found this performing arts school in London that was just starting up, and they were accepting new students. And it was primarily dance, but also offered acting and singing and dialects and all different kinds of dance. So it was really sort of foundational in terms of performing arts. And she signed me up for that. God bless her, honestly, because I'd be like, I don't know what I'd be doing right now if it wasn't for my mom. And I signed up and started studying at this school called London Studio Centre, which is quite a big school now, but it was literally the first year that it was open when I went. That's sort of what I decided to do. And like I said, it was foundational for me. It really gave me a rounded sort of education in performing arts.
Well, your first film role was in the Canon Films movie, The Apple. So how'd you get involved with that?
Well, I was in London, and I was on my way to class, actually, and I ran into a couple of classmates who were like walking in the opposite direction, and I was like, oh, where are you going? And they said, well, we heard about this audition, and we thought we'd just go and check it out. It was like an open audition for dancers. And basically my mentor, Jill McDonald from Edmonton, she was like, when you go to London, just take advantage of every opportunity that you have there. I mean, it's great that you're studying and everything, but if you can, audition for things. And that sort of hit me, when my friend said that, and I thought, okay, I mean, I've never done anything like this before. What the heck? So I just tagged along, and it was an open audition or cattle call audition. Tons of people there. Like, there had to be like 200 dancers there. And so there I was in the middle of the whole thing, trying to figure out the choreography. Most people were prepared to like read for a role, or they sort of, generally you read what the audition is all about and you prepare for something. I was not prepared for anything. I was just there. And the director and the producer were sitting there watching all the dancers, and the director kind of saw me in the middle of this maelstrom and had me sort of pulled me out of the crowd and said, "Do you act?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." Of course, seasoned. So he had me read for this role, and then he asked me if I sang, and I said, "Sure." These first auditions is like, you're not going to say, well, I suppose you can say no, but you may as well just say yes to everything, pretty much. So I sang, I did a singing audition, I did an acting audition, and within a week, I was cast in the lead role of this movie.
God, well, I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. What's that like for you? You just start out auditioning for a dancing role, then suddenly you're the lead. I mean,
yeah, right. It was, what really helped me a lot was my naivete. I was really just kind of going with the flow. I had no sort of preconceived ideas of what it meant at all, because I didn't know what it meant. I'd never been in that position before, but I just thought, okay, I'll try this now. I mean, I literally was like, I really didn't have a concept of what it all meant. I got the script and I was fascinated by the script. I just kept reading it over and over and over again. By the time we shot the thing, I knew everybody's part. And then all the music, and we rehearsed the music, and I just loved it. So I was, in that sense, I was completely prepared. And then I would show up on set and directed and told what to do, and I did it. And I got to work with some incredible actors, but I was really just kind of going with it, as opposed to, I guess, somebody who has thought their whole life they're going to be an actress and they're going to go to Hollywood and darn it, they're going to make it, no matter what it takes. I didn't come from that place. I was already doing what I really wanted to do. And then this opportunity came up. So I thought, well, we'll see what happens with this. And then I'll go back to my dance class, So there was not a lot at stake for me, which really helped me enormously in terms of just being relaxed and comfortable. And also the character that I played, Bibi, was basically me, just young and naive.
Well, now I'm curious with this, because there's been so much written about Canon films and Golden Globus. So what were your experiences like working with them? And there's a documentary about them too. I mean, so what were your experiences?
I was in that documentary,
Yes.
as a matter of fact. Yeah, they interviewed me as well. Yeah, I mean, again, I didn't have any preconceived ideas. I'd never worked with the director before. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, he was kind of a bear, I want to say. He was, speaking of at stake, what's at stake here? To Golden Globus, this movie for them was going to be their intro into Hollywood. And it was going to be this blockbuster movie that gave them recognition, and everybody would be just falling on their knees. Yeah, you're so great. There was so much integrity behind this movie, which is funny to say now when you watch it, because it's a really bizarre movie. But their objective was to break into the business big time. And at the time, there were a lot of these, like Xanadu and, all these kind of sort of rock musical, sort of spacey rock musical kind of weird, fantastical movies at the time. And they were trying to tap into that genre. But it was just, I don't know. I mean, it was a concept that maybe could have worked, but I feel like they were they're Israeli. He was Menachem Golan was a huge director in Israel, award-winning, done some terrific stuff. But I feel like there was a sensibility that was sort of missing in terms of an American audience. But so again, going onto the set, just kind of going with the flow, just being in awe of everything that was going on around me. I mean, there was one time, again, this was very new for me, and we were shooting in Berlin. And at that time, it was before the wall was down. So it was West Berlin, which was like this little island in the middle of East Germany, which was communist at the time. So it was sort of, you had to fly through East Germany in a very specific flight path. You were checked for, the security was beyond even what you get today. I mean, in those days, there really wasn't that much security getting on an airplane. Going into Berlin, West Berlin, huge security. But it was like this little island in the middle of communist Germany, and it sort of had this reverse sort of psychology there, where everything was bigger and bolder and brighter and louder and crazier, and there was a lot of nightlife, And I remember one night I didn't realize that I had to work the next day. And so I stayed out all night. I was like, I'm off the next day. So I just stayed out all night with like a bunch of dancers and things like that, and had a lot of fun. And I got back to the hotel at like 7:30 in the morning, and one of the ADs was just going crazy trying to find me, because I was supposed to be on the set. I was supposed to be in makeup. And so they scooped me up, took me to the studio. I'm sitting in the makeup chair like an hour or two late, and Menachem comes down there. He was like so mad at me, because it was a lot of back then you were shooting with film. It was much more expensive to even shoot. It wasn't like, it was just a big expensive mistake that I'd made, and holding up production and everything. And he was so mad. He came down and he was like, all I remember is, you will never work in this business again. Like that, and he storms out after like yelling at me. And I'm like, wow. And even that, it was like, I mean, it was hard for me to have him yell at me like that. But at the same time, it wasn't, I was like, okay, I guess I'm not going to work in this business again. It was just, again, this sort of sense of, I don't know, naivete or sense of myself. I think I got a lot of my sort of inner personal strength from my mother again. She was just a very strong, independent, wise woman, and didn't put up with any BS, and I think I got that from her, and it served me very, very well through my entire career.
Well, I want to talk about your the Stallone film that you were in, Nighthawks, which also had Billy D. Williams, Rutger Hauer, Lindsay Wagner. So Stallone was already a huge star at this time. So how'd you get into that? And was that just like night and day from like the Apple, from a big to a big budget production?
It really was, in a way. I mean, also, I just had this little tiny part. I was back in London, and I auditioned for Stallone, and there was like 2 or 3 other girls, and we're just like, oh, it's Sylvester Stallone, and so because he'd done Rocky, and so when I got that role, I was very, very excited, and it was completely different. It was also completely different because I was just like almost a glorified extra, really. But what really stood out to me at that time was working opposite Rutger Hauer, who was an incredible actor. And this scene that we did together kind of established him as just the worst terrorist on the planet Earth, because I'm this kind of sweet, innocent sales girl in a department store trying to sell him some perfume or something as he's sliding a bomb under my counter, and then the next thing you see is the entire store exploding. So I probably didn't make it. So it was like an establishing scene for him. I guess it was pretty early in the movie, but Rutger Hauer stayed in character, and he scared the crap out of me. That was new, watching that sort of consummate actor who, I'm like trying to do, have small talk with him or whatever. Oh, no. He was his character. That was an interesting experience.
Well, before you got into some of your bigger roles, you guest starred in several series, a couple in particular we wanted to ask about. One was McLean's Law with James Arness, who I had the privilege of working with when I was young. And you also worked with Carl Franklin, who I also had the privilege of working with on a series in the mid-70s. So had you watched Gunsmoke? Because I was a huge fan of the show. And what was it like to suddenly be appearing on a series with someone who was already a star when you were a kid?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I watched Gunsmoke. I loved Gunsmoke. Yeah, that was otherworldly. I mean, when I first sort of landed in Hollywood, it was sort of a whirlwind thing. And then I did a couple of guest spots on these shows, and it's sort of an out of body experience. He's huge. He's this massive guy. I watched that recently, and I'm just like, oh my God, I so didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, it's embarrassing watching myself, back in the day when I was still sort of trying to figure everything out. I did that, and which was, it's hard. Those were so long ago, and it's almost like another lifetime. So it's hard to remember the details of it. I think I was really super nervous. I did Knight Rider, which was really fun.
What was Hasselhoff like?
I was just like, I love you so much. He was so adorable, and he was really charming, and that he was really, really sweet. I remember loving doing that show, and then learning all about how the car worked, because of course I grew up watching that show. So that was even more impactful in a way, because I sort of learned the secret of Kit, and then I got to work with this awesome, handsome, sweet guy. It was a whirlwind. It really was, just getting out there and auditioning. And at that time, because I was sort of new in LA and the right age and the right look for those in the 80s, I was auditioning all the time, like several times a day. It was pretty crazy. And it took me a few months to really get into a rhythm. And at one point, my agent, I happened to get an agency quite quickly based on the fact that I had a lead role in the movie, which was really the only reason I got it. Got this agent so quickly. But they, at one point, were like, brought me into the office and were like, can you explain why you're not getting any roles after auditioning for like 3 months? And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just showing up and doing the best I can. But I eventually, figured it out, and I was taking acting classes and things like that. Just trying to figure it all out. I was very raw.
Well, you did get a role in Days of Our Lives, creating the character of Caleb Brady. So how did you wind up in that, or was that just like at the end of the string of like jobs you didn't get?
Oh, probably. I mean, I've been in LA for probably over a year by that time, and I was, again, it was a learning curve for me, um, and I think that audition went quite well. I felt comfortable. In the role. They were creating this new family, the Bradys, and I sort of fit the physical look too of it. So that I think was a legit get. Although once I started doing Days of Our Lives, it was like the hardest work I've ever done in my life, because there's so much content in such a short period of time. You just have to be a machine. You have to be a machine to do a soap opera. I'm in awe.
What's the shooting schedule like? I mean, is it like just every single day, like more, hours and hours?
Yeah. 5 days a week from 7 in the morning to 5 at night or something like that, or whenever it ends. It's brutal. You get there, every soap opera does it. I've only really had experience on a couple of soap operas, but what Days did was you would get there in the morning and you would block it for like the camera people and everything, and figure out where the cameras were going to go, and you have your script and you could read through your bits and whatnot. Then that was first thing in the morning. The second thing, before lunch, you would run through it again, and the cameras had figured out where they were going to go, and you were supposed to be off book by then. And then after lunch, it was a dress rehearsal, and then after the dress rehearsal, you shot it. And I was very in my head on that show. I was so nervous. And I mean, the very first scene I ever did as Kayla Brady, nurse, I was this nurse. There was somebody, in the hospital, and I was reporting to all these lead characters that had been on the show forever. And I literally, on soap operas, the story moves forward very slowly in case whoever watches the show misses an episode. You can catch up on the next episode. You can come back 5 years later and catch up, basically. So my role was to tell these people what was going on with whoever was in the hospital, but I had to name each one of them. And these were well-established characters, and I just got all their names completely wrong. It was just terrible. And also in soap operas, they want you to do it in one take. You don't get even 2 takes. In this particular case, they gave me 2 takes because the actors were like, she doesn't know our names. So just right out of the gate, I was like, oh no, this is not good for me. So I struggled with memorizing all this stuff. And I think what helps is if you're on there long enough and you have these kind of running storylines, you can almost predict what the writers are going to say. In a way, you get to know your character. The writers and the actors are sort of symbiotic. I never really got to that point, not in my mind anyway. So I found it a lot of work. I found it very, very hard. And again, like I say, I'm just in awe of the actors that just plow through those things without even hesitation. So I was on that for a couple of years, which was a great experience, but it was hard.
Well, I'm curious now, when
I'm sorry, I got to interject. I'm jumping on Jonathan for a second because I have to interject. Yeah. I admire you so much for tackling it, period, because I did 2 days on Days of Our Lives.
Oh, did you?
There was a slim possibility that my character was going to continue on maybe for a little while, and I prayed that it didn't, because it was the most brutal work I've ever done. I mean, like you starred in movies was far easier than those 2 days that just absolutely gutted me. And I said, man, I looked around and everyone was so at ease and they were so good at what they did. And I was a nervous wreck, just like you. So I totally get it. So I had to empathize with you there for a minute.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Oh,
'Cause I
yeah.
always feel like, I mean, it's just undeniable for me, but I always also feel like a lot of actors will say, "Oh, it was such a great a training ground, and you learn discipline and all that stuff." I was like, no, it was chaos for me. And also, well, I don't want to get into, you know, all the other stuff in terms of training ground, but it's a different kind of acting. You know, it's very specific. There's no real freedom in terms of what you're allowed to say or how you delve into your character or anything like that. It's all about getting the words out, getting the storyline out, and then at the end, when there's always that sort of pregnant pause, you know, looking like that. Or I never knew what to do. I'd finish my line and the camera was on me. I'm like, okay. And, you know, but you're supposed to go, or whatever you're supposed to do. I don't even know. I still don't know to this day.
I'm curious now, because someone took over the role. Did you watch it afterwards? Is it weird to see someone else doing your part? I mean, kind of.
It was a few years after I left, which was very unceremonious, by the way, my leaving. I think they just were like, yeah, she's way too uncomfortable here. It was like, finally, you know, Kayla left home living with her parents and moves into an apartment with a friend, and I'm going to go upstairs and check out the bathroom. And I never came out of the bathroom. I was like, that's it? No, I don't even get to be killed or anything. Like, you know, the Salem Slayer doesn't get me, or whatever his name was. What was the question?
No, just it was weird to see someone else in your role afterwards.
Oh, right. Yeah, enough time had passed, and I guess, you know, when they brought, I forget what her name is, but she was terrific, and she was on. I think she's still on the show today. I mean, That's when the character became really iconic, and I'm just like a leech feeding off it. I'm like, I was the original one. You know, she's the really good one, but I was the original one. Somebody at a convention brought this big, huge book of the history of Days of Our Lives, and you know, everybody who'd ever been in Days of Our Lives was in there, and he wanted me to sign it. I wasn't even mentioned.
Oh, wow, that's terrible.
Which was a little. That hurt my feelings a little bit, because I was on it for 2 years. So that's how much impact I had on that show.
Oh, good grief.
They didn't even mention my name.
Wow. Well, we're dying to talk about Last Starfighter, and we both love this movie. How did you get involved in it?
Yeah, I was on Days of Our Lives, actually, when I auditioned for The Last Starfighter. Which was kind of cool. I mean, that my agents were still sending me out for stuff. Maybe they knew. So yeah, you know, it was a regular audition process. I read with the casting person, and then they had callbacks. And they at the callbacks, they paired us with people, and I was paired with Lance Guest. And Lance was he and I he's a very serious kind of when he went to college, it was all about acting, and he was a very focused, serious actor, as opposed to me, who just kind of lucked into it. And I was still at this point just loving every second and not thinking too much about it, just kind of, I'm more of an off the cuff sort of actor. And he is much more trained, and I don't want to speak for him in terms of his method or whatever it is, but he was like, let's go out and just, you know, run the lines and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. And we did that, and we sort of talked and got to know each other a little bit, and then we went in and read, and I remember Nick Castle being in there and the producer. And they had us do a little bit of reading, and then they wanted us to just kind of improvise, the scene at the lake. But they didn't really, we didn't know what the scene at the lake was at that time. So they just said, you're at the lake and your boyfriend and girlfriend. It's kind of this romantic situation. So we kind of improvised, we were lying in this little office, lying on the floor, looking up at the stars and kind of talking and being a little bit romantic and stuff like that. I remember that part. And then I just remember that we were told that we had the role, and which was also interesting because, all the hot young actors of the day were auditioning as well. But I think I don't know if I read this somewhere or if it's just my thought, that they wanted a couple of actors who weren't as established as a lot of the sort of brat pack people were at that time. And we got the role, and Lance and I again sort of hung out a bit so we could get to know each other a little bit, and try to make the thing seem authentic. And he and I had so much fun together. We're still really, really good friends today. I just think our chemistry was terrific, and I think that comes across on screen.
Oh, Robert Preston was in it. It was so great, and it was his last film. What are some of your memories of him, and what was he like working with?
Well, he and I never had any scenes together. So which was a bit of a drag. Lance has some great stories. You'll have to talk to Lance. He has some great stories about working with Robert Preston, because, Robert Preston was in his 70s, and he was just he was so iconic, and he was so comfortable as an actor. And Lance was just, as he tells a story, he wanted to rehearse, and he really wanted to have it down before they shot. And Robert was like, yeah, whatever you want to do, let's just do it. You want to run the lecture? Sure. Well, so he was very, very kind and accommodating, and never like snobby or anything like that at all. What you see is what you get with Robert Preston. But I was lucky enough to meet him. We did a bunch of reshoots at a studio, and I was brought in the afternoon one day, and he was leaving as I came in, and I was introduced to him, and he took my hand, and he looked me right in the eyes, and he kissed my hand, and he said, "It's a pleasure meeting you." And I was just like, I fell in love with him in that moment. He sort of glowed. He was one of those people that just kind of had this gold aura around him. So that was a really special moment. But that was the only time I got to meet him, unfortunately.
Really? What about Nick Castle, who played Mike Myers in Halloween? What was he like as a director?
Yeah, he was terrific. He was lovely. This is very cliche, but I always say that it was kind of like this little film was sort of a labor of love for everybody involved. The writer, the director, the producer, they were all very young. It was a small movie. And we were all just kind of green, but just wanting to make the best movie that we could. And he was calm. He loved working with young people. He was very sweet. He was very benevolent. I loved it. I loved him. He was unassuming. He was sort of the opposite of Menachem Golan. Just very calm and lovely man. And again, he and I are still friends to this day too. He's the greatest. He's so sweet. I love him to death.
Well, you had mentioned, we talked about Nighthawks a little bit, that you'd had a small role in that, but this was the largest budgeted movie that you'd taken a lead in up to that point. So did you feel a difference, like working on a movie like this compared to some of the earlier productions now?
The Last Starfighter compared to earlier productions?
Yeah.
Yes and no. I mean, it wasn't a massive budget movie. So, I mean, and we were still young, and our like we had, we didn't have the big trailers or anything like that. We had the honey wagons, which was fine. The drag about for me for the Last Starfighter was most of my shooting was done at night, and I hate night shooting. It so screws with me. There was a couple of days where during the day I would work on Days of Our Lives, and then at night go out to Antelope Valley or whatever it was and shoot the Last Starfighter. But it didn't, it didn't feel like this big glamorous movie. It felt, I don't know, it just was very comfortable, and everybody was really great, but it wasn't, luxurious on any level. It was just really nice. But everybody seemed to be coming from the same place. You know what I mean? Even if there were like Robert Preston, and it never felt like there were big movie stars or somebody had to be treated differently. We were all just like really excited to be there and wanted to make a good movie. Yeah.
Well, this film was one of the earliest to really integrate so much CGI into it. Was everyone amazed at the time for what they were attempting to do?
I had no idea at that time what was going on in terms of CGI behind the scenes. I learned I think it was the 20th anniversary screening. In Santa Monica, they did a screening, and they invited for the Q&A all the technical people to come up on stage afterwards for the Q&A, along with me, and Nick was there. Lance was working. I don't think he wasn't there. I think he was working or something. That was the first time I knew anything about the CGI and the process that they went through while we were shooting. Because not only was it one of the earliest, the one that sort of got some notoriety was Tron, but it was nothing compared to what they were attempting to do for the Last Starfighter, and they were literally creating programs while we were shooting the movie. They were still not sure whether they were going to try to use this newfangled CGI thing or go with the regular special effects with the models and stuff like that. They weren't sure at all. So from the stories that I hear, it was back in the day when the computers they would take up an entire room, and people were like were just working like crazy, almost 24/7. Every once in a while, you'd hear this eureka! Somebody would figure out a program to create, I don't know, one of those starship things, or one of the big boulders that were floating through space that they were hiding in and stuff like that. So yeah, it doesn't. I mean, people have started talking about it a little more, but I really feel like the Last Starfighter was sort of the foundation for all the CGI that you see today, because it was just built on that. And even the people that did that in the day wish they'd had more time, because like the rock thing that I'm talking about, one of the guys who created that is sort of frustrated because he feels like it looked like melted chocolate ice cream, because he didn't have enough time to really delve into the detail of it. But it was literally groundbreaking. And I had no idea, none at the time, none. I mean, I didn't do anything in outer space, obviously. So my only sort of experience with all that was when the thing lands in the trailer park, and all that was a giant fan. It was the California desert, so it's dry and dusty, and then they have this giant fan blowing dust in your and Nick is like, okay, so look somewhere up there, and you're just in awe, and it's like you've never seen anything like this before. It's a big spaceship. And I'm okay. I do whatever I did. but mostly it was like, I hope that I, don't breathe in a whole bunch of dust and go blinded by it all. But I mean, I think it turned out really, really well. Yeah, so that's a relative. It was again, had no idea at the time. Well, while we were shooting, I didn't even know anything about it until like 25 years later.
Okay, you on a personal level, now you've already been a regular on Days of Our Lives, but did you notice any difference in your recognition or popularity after appearing in this compared to earlier in your career?
Well, in terms of casting, I did. Yeah, I this is a weird thing with me, I think. I've worked with so many actors who are just so annoyed about how often they get recognized and I can't do anything and everybody's always pestering me to do stuff. And I'm like, I never feel like I'm recognized like on the street or anything like that. And somebody will say to me, that person just blah 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 blah. And I'm like, really? I mean, I don't know. I'm oblivious to junk, I guess. But also, that works for me because if I thought that everybody was looking at me all the time, that's not a good feeling. I don't feel like. But in terms of casting, when I did The Last Starfighter, yes, it sort of put me on the map for casting directors, and that led to like Night of the Comet, which then led to, I did a movie called Mischief, and then, Weekend at Bernie's another big one. But I did like a lot of stuff in a short period of time because, the work begot work, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the one time when I did feel like I was recognized out in public more was on Days of Our Lives, for sure, like in grocery stores and things like that. And it was uncomfortable. I don't know how movie stars do it. I really don't. You're sitting in a grocery store just trying to buy some milk or something, and people are staring at you. Like, you're like, oh my God, what do I look like? I don't know. Anyway.
Well, that's something else that we share because I went through a protracted period of time where that was happening to me. And I'm a very shy person, generally speaking, and especially when I was younger and very introverted. And to have people staring or whispering and and looking and you just feel like, okay, now I would walk around like this robot, making sure I didn't, scratch my head or something like that. It was always very, really... very unnerving for me. Thankfully, it doesn't happen anymore. I'm grateful for it. But it's like, it's a push me, pull you kind of situation because, if you're being recognized that much, you're out there, people know you, and that's a good thing. But, we all deal with it, so differently. So I totally get it. Well, listen, did you ever get to see the musical based on it?
I didn't, which I'm so disappointed about because I was living in New York at the time and it came out in New York. I'm not even sure, was it off Broadway or somewhere? I didn't hear about it until years later. And I'm so mad that I didn't know because it would have been really fun. I have seen a bunch of photographs of it, and I think I actually have the soundtrack.
Oh,
but no, I never saw it. But I mean, what a great homage! I mean, I love that.
Well, every so often there's talk of a sequel or remake. Have you heard anything about it? And would you be up for participating in it?
No. Well, what do you think? Of course I would be. I mean, I would love to. They've been talking about doing a sequel for so long. I mean, probably 15 years ago, Lance and I met with Nick, and we went for lunch, and he was telling about this concept he had for the sequel, which we thought was really cool. So yeah, Jonathan Betchell who was the original writer, has a script for a sequel, and we know the basic concept, which is fantastic, and we would be a part of it. And he's apparently there about, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that, this new rule came about where original writers, whoever owned their property, had to give it back to the original writers if they wanted it. So he got the property back from Universal, I think, and then ironically he went back to Universal to try to sell it as a sequel, his he owns the property of The Last Starfighter, so wrote the sequel and is trying to sell it. Yeah, so they've been talking about it for a long time, and it's gone through lots of different stages. My brother, in fact, today or yesterday, I'm gonna read what he said. Hold on, got my glasses on. Gonna read what my brother said because he was reading this book. Okay, where is it? This will just take me a second. He says, Kathy, I was reading Seth Rogen's yearbook. I guess it's a book he wrote, in which he talks about how The Last Starfighter was the perfect concept and a movie that his production company wanted to remake with Steven Spielberg. Then later in the chapter, then he goes on about later in the chapter, same chapter, he talks about Weekend at Bernie's. And then my brother says, coincidence? I think not. So, apparently, Seth, if you're out there.
Wow, that would be absolutely cool. Amazing.
I know. But I think that was an idea he had before Jonathan Batchel got the rights back to the script. So, but that, and I like the fact that he's the one who's written the sequel, because it will be more, in my mind, it'll have sort of more authenticity and integrity to the original, hopefully.
Yeah. Oh, sure. For sure. Now, you mentioned Night of the Comet, which you were the lead in, and is a huge cult favorite. How did that come about?
That was more, so I did The Last Starfighter. So I was a little bit more on the map in terms of casting. And I did, from my recollection, I don't think I actually had to read for the casting director. I think I went right into reading for the producer director, and they put me with another actor. And we read together, and I think they sort of, I don't know. I don't know. I think they had already sort of were seriously considering me for the role. And they had me read with another actor. And when I learned that I was cast, they said, okay, now we're going to do this little photo session because there's, some family photos that we have to put around the house and things like that. So it was going to be this casual photo session. And I showed up, and Kelly Maroney was there, and she was not the one that I read with. So I was like, oh, that's it. That sort of took me off guard. I knew she was there with another actress and reading after we read. So I knew she had read for it, but it was sort of a surprise because we had never read together. But yeah, so that was terrific, and she and I are still really good friends. I mean, we had a gas. That was a very, again, low budget movie, lower even than The Last Starfighter. And I always sort of think of it as like guerrilla filmmaking, because we were just out there pounding the pavement, taking advantage of places that were abandoned. So we, didn't have to like hold up traffic or anything, because there was not the money to hire a police force to, hold back traffic. And that's why the scenes that you see in downtown LA in those days, we shot around Christmas. Night of the Comet is a Christmas movie. That's debated sometimes, but of course it is. But we shot like, I don't know if it was Christmas morning or Christmas Eve or something like that, when we shot in downtown LA, and it was deserted because back in those days in the early 80s, it wasn't a residential place at all. It was just banks, and people would fly in for business meetings, and it was, it was not what it is now. So it was possible to shoot in downtown LA and have it appear abandoned, which is incredible.
It's one of those movies that's become more popular after its initial run. Mm-hmm. So do you notice when things like that happen that, all of a sudden people are talking about it more than when it first came out?
Well, in the day, no. I mean, it did okay. There's all sorts of theories about what movies came out at the same time, and so it kind of got lost in the shuffle or whatever. But it was one of those, it was in the day, like The Last Starfighter, when everything kind of, after it was released in the theater, it went right to VHS. And it became one of those movies that, you know, latchkey kids and things like that would watch at home after school. And then they would watch it over and over and over again. And that, I think, and Last Starfighter is similar to that. That's where it really found its footing. And I only know that from conventions that I've done where, you know, these people will come up to me, grown-ups, who said, you were my babysitter and as a kid. And this one brother and sister came up to Kelly and me and with a little booklet that they made as kids, she and her brother, with stick figures of Reg and Sam, that told the entire story of Night of the Comet. They created a book, a cartoon book, which was, yeah, it just sort of, those kind of stories sort of blow you away. But like I said, it sort of found its footing and its exposure on VHS. And I can't tell you how many young women had such a positive influence from watching these two girls who are just kind of regular girls be able to actually take charge and look after themselves in an apocalypse and defend themselves and not really think about it too much. You know, that's just what they did, which is kind of a rare thing. You know, you don't see that very often. More often than not, a woman has to sort of depend on a guy, or what it's become now is they're superheroes. They're not, none of these strong, powerful women, which is great to have strong, powerful women in the lead roles, but they all seem to be sort of these inaccessible superheroes. They're just not regular people, you know. One of my theories is one of the reasons that The Last Starfighter and Night of the Comet have the longevity that they have is because these characters are just regular, ordinary people that happen to find themselves in extraordinary situations. So the audience can relate to them and join them on their adventure or their journey or whatever it is, and feel like they are in it. You know, these characters are accessible to them. The story is accessible, and it gives them a sense of possibility, I think.
Yeah, well, it's another movie that has remake rumors hovering around it. Have you heard anything about that?
I have heard bits and pieces about that. It sort of comes and then it goes, and it comes. Tom Eberhardt, who directed and wrote it, again, he has the rights to it again. And I think he's working with, did he say MGMUA, for a remake. I don't have as much faith that it will be as much of a sequel as it will be maybe a kind of a reinterpretation or remake of Night of the Comet, which, whatever. I mean, I just find that a bit of a drag. Because
it's the reimagining term that always, you know, kind of makes me cringe a little bit. But
I mean, it's so ripe for special effects and zombies and violence and, you know, girls like shooting things up and stuff like that, which I don't know what it is. I have no idea what the new script is. I don't think Tom has written it. I think it's somebody else who's writing it, which always makes me nervous. But, you know, it really lends itself to, you know, upping the ante and making it really exciting. But that's not what it's about. You know, that's not what Night of the Comet is. It's not meant to be a horror movie or a violence movie or a, you know, super power, strong women shooting up zombies or whatever. It's meant to be kind of this tongue-in-cheek sort of look at what, teenagers would do if there were no parents around, or if the boy that they had a crush on at school, that's her last chance at love, kind of a thing. Really exploring maybe what real people might, especially kids, might feel. So I don't hold a lot of faith in the fact that it'll stick to that kind of a theme, but we'll see. And I don't think Kelly and I will be involved either.
Well, I hope you do. I really hope that they. I always hate when they don't put the original cast at least in some cameos. When I always
right?
think it's an opportunity. Always.
I know. Yeah.
Let's talk about Weekend at Bernie's, which also starred Andrew McCarthy, Jonathan Silverman, Terry Kaiser. So how did you become involved in that?
Yeah. Again, I was asked to read for Ted, and Jonathan Silverman was in the room. They wanted to see what our chemistry was like, I guess. So I showed up, and I was excited about this because this was a whole kind of different genre. I mean, I feel like I've been really lucky with the work that I've done, because I feel, I was early in my career, I was definitely cast as kind of the girl next door, all American kind of a thing, which is fine. But so when I did Night of the Comet, I was really happy to do that, because I also felt like it was more like who I was. I was more that person, I really was. So that was fun for me. But in Weekend at Bernie's, I was the girl next door, no question, but it was a whole different genre in terms of the comedy and everything. And Ted Kotcheff, the director, who wouldn't want to work with him? Or Andrew McCarthy and Jonathan Silverman. I mean, this to me was like a really great opportunity for me. So when I went in to read with Jonathan and Ted, they were really nice. Jonathan's just a lovely guy. But I left there thinking, I have screwed this up. I really blew this audition. I called my manager and I was devastated. I was like, you have to call them and let me go back there, because whatever I did, it was wrong. I forgot my lines. I just felt like I really screwed it up. And then they offered me the role. So I guess it was more about not necessarily getting the words exactly right, but just to see if Jonathan and I, it was one of those chemistry things, I guess. So that worked out. And I have to say, when I read the script, I was like, this is kind of gross. It's not really that funny.
Yeah.
Just dragging a dead body around, that's funny somehow, and well, I was wrong. I was like, nobody's going to think this is funny. It's kind of disgusting. And I was completely wrong about that, of course. I mean, it was one of those first kind of movies that it was so off the wall. It's kind of like an early Will Ferrell movie to me, just taking everything to the nth degree and just throwing it against the wall. And I mean, there's a crazy off the wall comedy. But I had such a great time doing it. And like I said, Jonathan's was just a lovely guy. Terry Kaiser. I mean, you can tell a good actor if he's playing dead and you can't take your eyes off him. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry. That's the thing that just blew me away, because when I saw the promos for it, and I have to say, if I'd read the script, I don't know that I would have gotten it either. That's a hard thing to see on the page for sure. But man, when I saw that, I said, sorry to say this, but the best actor in this movie is the dead guy, because you're right. You can't stop watching him. It's the weirdest thing. And it's just fascinating to me. It's incredible. It's a really good study for actors. If you're going to pick a film for an actor to study, it's like Weekend at Bernie's. That's acting,
Watch Terry Kaiser.
Yeah,
what is he? what is he doing or not doing that just makes everybody like
Yeah.
look at him and laugh hysterically? I mean, he was brilliant. He was
Well,
brilliant.
was it hard keeping a straight face when you were shooting?
Yes, is absolutely, it was hard keeping a straight face. I mean, it was hilarious. I remember one time on the set, it was actually, it may have been his first scene that he shot dead. You know, I mean, even when he was alive, I mean, that character that he played as that slimy, you know, whatever he was, investment guy, you know, and all hyped up on coke. He was just like, and then laughing. I mean, Terry is an incredible actor, period. But so one of the first scenes that he did when he was dead was, I happened to be on the set that day, was when Jonathan and Andrew's character find him at his desk, and they go up and start talking to him like he's just sitting at the desk, and then they realize he's dead, and they're like, "Oh my God, he's dead!" And so it was Terry. There were times when it wasn't Terry, like when he was being pulled behind the boat and banging into the buoys and things like that. That was not actually Terry, thank goodness. But this was Terry. So he's just sitting there like this, and you know, it's very hard to play dead, especially if the camera's on you. You can't let your eyes flutter or anything like that. So in the wide shot, they were doing it, and he was dead, and they're like figuring it all out and going a little crazy. And then when the dialogue was done, Ted behind the camera was like, meaning keep rolling. So everybody was just quiet, and Terry was sitting there waiting to hear cut, you know, but he couldn't open his eyes and he couldn't breathe. I'm behind the camera watching this and we're like, this is hilarious. Finally, he was just like, we all laughed hysterically at his expense.
Any other memories from shooting that movie?
Oh yes, yeah. You know, it was interesting for me because we shot in North Carolina in Wilmington. It was supposed to be the Hamptons, right? But we shot down there, and that house was just built on a sand dune. It had no foundation. It was built for the movie. They built the swimming pool and everything. You'd walk behind a door, and there was nothing there, kind of a thing. Which was sort of interesting. They kept me, instead of flying me back and forth from LA, they kept me in North Carolina. So it was, you know, a couple of months there probably, or maybe not that long, 6 weeks. But I only worked maybe 10 days or not even. So I had to figure out what to do, which was Wilmington. I don't know what it's like now, but they did have a studio. Others like Dino De Laurentiis did some stuff there and things like that. But it was a pretty quiet town, so there was not a lot to do. So that was a little bit boring. So when I would get to go on the set, you know, Andrew and Jonathan were in everything. So they were working every single day, and you get exhausted. They're long days, and I would show up and I'd be like, so excited to be there, so rested, so like hyper and this going on, and they're just like in the makeup chair like, and I'm like, ah, what? Oh, it's, I think I think Jonathan was more patient with me than Andrew. I think they were just like, get her out of here. I was like a tsetse fly, you know, I was very annoying, but it was a lot of, I mean, it was so much fun working on that. The scene where we're in Jonathan's apartment and we're just about to start making out and his dad comes in to the kitchen. Remember that part?
Yes.
And yeah. And it's like Jonathan is pretending he's the butler, and so or something. And I'm like, Jeeves, you know, you may leave. You like this, and his dad goes, "Yeah, you can leave," or something like that, whatever the dialogue is. That was actually Ted Kotcheff, the director.
Oh.
And Andrew McCarthy directed that scene. And
Wow.
Andrew, of course, now he's a big director now, Andrew McCarthy. But back in those days, he knew he wanted to direct, so he was allowed to direct that scene. I really love that scene. I think it's really funny.
Well, were you asked to do the sequel?
I was not.
We'll leave it at that.
We'll leave it. I think it might have been the tsetse fly syndrome. They were like, "Please don't bring her back." No, I mean, I wasn't, and which was it was fine. It was a whole different concept. They were off in the Bahamas or somewhere, and it's fine. It wasn't as good as the first one.
No, definitely was not. No. So,
I don't know. I don't even know if I've seen it, frankly.
I was going to ask that if you even bothered to watch it even after you went.
Yeah, I didn't even hear about it until it was released. So I didn't go out of my way to watch it. I've seen bits and pieces of it, and I know there was the music and Bernie dancing and things like that, and a little homage to his mother. My son in high school did this class called African dance, very popular in the school that he went to, and they would have this huge recital at the end of the year, and very, very popular, high energy, and then if you were a senior in high school, you got to have a little bit of a solo in African dance, and he'd been taking it for years, so he was pretty good at African dance, as were all the other kids. I mean, whoever could get into African dance would do it because it was such a fun class to do. And so as a senior, when he got to do a solo, and I know it was sort of an homage to me, but he did the Bernie dance. And I was like, well, wrong movie, but that's perfectly fine.
You've been fortunate to be in some really enduring movies that are still beloved today. I mean, which one do you get recognized for the most?
Well, the one that people know the most, I think, is Weekend at Bernie's. But I'm starting to get to the point where I'm starting to outlive like the bigger part of the audience. So they'll be like, "Oh, you're an actor. What movies have you done?" I'm like, "Well, I did The Last Starfighter." No. Night of the no. Weekend at Bernie's. Oh yeah, I've heard of that. I'm like, oh. But having said that, I know that those are like younger people who are not so familiar with me, but there are still like even here we have a house. This is our house here, and we have a neighbor whose daughter is probably in her 40s. I met her last year. She was wearing a Night of the Comet t-shirt. And she said, my brother and I used to watch it all the time. And one year for Christmas, we gave each other Night of the Comet t-shirts. And it was so, it's just really sweet. So it's funny, if I do a guest spot on a popular TV show or something, I forget what the show was now. But I did an episode of this show, and then like it aired, and then the next day my husband was going in for surgery, and we're sitting in this waiting room in the hospital, and it was the first time in a long time where people were like looking at me and kind of, how do I know her? That kind of thing. So that was sort of interesting. But yeah, I get that sort of recognition at conventions. That's the new sort of thing, which is amazing to me. It's amazing. Love it.
Well, is it true that you turned down the role of Michael J. Fox's girlfriend on Family Ties?
You would have to bring that up. Yes, I did. Because back in those days, and I was doing movies, um, there was this general consensus that if you were doing movies, you don't do television.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember.
So, yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
So I was like, I wouldn't do that. Um, but that probably was a really stupid mentality because, honestly, it all overlaps. So yeah, I wish yeah, I'm sad that I didn't do that in retrospect for sure.
Well, we often discuss here like the roles that you didn't take or the ones that,
Yeah.
almost turned down. Are there any others that you turned down or came close to getting?
Um, well, I can't really speak for the ones that I came close to getting because they never tell you that. You know what I mean? Um, so hopefully there were a lot that I really came close to. Um, that one was a one that I actually turned down. There weren't a lot that I turned down. I did audition for Friends,
Oh,
which and that was one that when I read that script, I thought, this is a great script. So I would have loved to have done that. But I think the feedback that was given my agent was, yeah, she's not that funny.
Oh yeah. Ouch. Oh gosh.
I'm like, oh
Gosh.
no. I think I wanted it too much or something. You know what I mean? When you go in and it's like, this would be so cool to get this role. And
I could see you in
Oh,
that. Actually,
well,
yeah.
obviously,
oh,
in retrospect, yeah. Oh my gosh.
yeah, that
Well,
that was a tough one.
you and I both had the privilege to appear in David Weiner's amazing documentary In Search of Tomorrow. So, how much fun? I
Yeah.
had a great time doing it. How much fun was it for you to revisit those roles?
It was, it was a weird situation for me because I was in New York and it was the most bizarre setup. So it was a little uncomfortable. They found this space in this abandoned bar. It was during COVID. Um, this place was just this empty room with sort of a exposed brick wall or something like that in the back. There was no heating. It was the middle of winter,
Mm,
and there was two women that were shooting it who did not speak English. And then the guy who interviewed me was on some Apple, laptop talking to me, and so it was a little uncomfortable, but it was fun. Having said that, I don't think it was like, because it was just uncomfortable, I don't think it was my best interview and I didn't feel like that connected, but I loved the concept of the show and I was very honored to be a part of it because I think it was a really interesting, wonderful, um, ex, ex, exploratory, I guess, if that's a word, in filmmaking at that time. And it was a
mm,
transitional time, the Star Wars, the special effects, the sci-fi kind of a thing, being integrated into all these different kinds of movies. Um, it was kind of a groundbreaking time, and like I said, Last Starfighter was no small part of that groundbreaking part with the CGI and integrating kind of a real down to earth story with this extraordinary outer space scenario.
mm, mm. Well, you've also done a couple of Hallmark holiday films, and there
Yes.
are people who are obsessed with those. And I have to admit, not me, but my wife is obsessed with them. Most of our DVR is
Yes.
taken up with Hallmark films. So, how
I
much
gotta
fun are
love
those to
that.
do? Because they really do look like it.
They are really, really fun. I did the last one I did was called A Nutcracker Christmas. And I know. I mean, how many ways can they get Christmas into the title. But having said that,
I'm endlessly fascinated by that. It's like a
oh my God.
creative challenge, period. But
oh my gosh. But what I loved about that was that it revolved around dance. And we shot in Toronto. It was a pretty big budget movie for Hallmark. And I feel like it was a little, to me, kind of a step above the traditional, oh, boy loses girlfriend and goes to a mountaintop for a sad Christmas, and then the beautiful girl shows up, or vice versa, or whatever. This was about a dancer who, let's see, how does it work? It goes over like a period of like 10 or 15 years, which was also kind of fun for me because I get to age in it. But my daughter wants to be this ballet dancer, and she's invited to join this ballet company in a big city. And eventually, she is invited to dance the lead role in the Nutcracker. And there's a tragedy. She's killed, and her sister replaces her. And I'm the mom through this whole thing. But what I loved the most about it was that they used it. We shot in Toronto, and they used the ballet company in Toronto. I don't remember exactly which Canadian ballet company it is, if it's the Toronto National Ballet or something like that, but a serious ballet company. And they did dance the Nutcracker, which is not an easy performance to do. And I got to sit and watch some of the rehearsals, and it brought me back to London when I was training in London. And I mean, it just kind of, I felt home again just watching it. I didn't get to dance. Well, I couldn't have anymore, but it just brought me back to my roots, and I loved being a part of that movie.
Oh, that's great. And what are you working on next?
So there's a couple of things in the wings. I have been working on a project of my own for the last COVID, actually, in a way, kind of rerouted me to where, so what am I going to do now? Well, I can't do anything. And a friend of mine, actually the producer of the movie Mischief that I did, which I really recommend, by the way. This is sort of one that went under the radar. It's set in the 50s. It's kind of like
I love Mischief.
I love Mischief too.
Yes.
I mean, it used to be called Heart and Soul, which is more of an appropriate name. It was through 20th Century Fox, and 20th Century Fox, just after we shot it, was changing hands, and they decided Porky's had come out, and they thought, oh, that's the kind of movie we want to have. So they tried to make it more of that kind of a thing, but it really still has it's not Porky's, trust me. But they wanted to put a little more teen sex into it than was originally intended. But it's a lovely movie. It's a really sweet movie, I feel like. But so anyway, what was the question?
No, that's what you were working on next.
Oh, okay, yes. So the producer for that movie, yes, he called me up, and he's in the past has called me a couple of times. Just he wanted to partner with me in other projects, and he has been teaching at a school in the States, teaching script writing. And he had he knows I'm Canadian, and he had a student who got his master's degree in writing, and had this idea that he and I write a script that could be shot in Canada, and have Canadian content and everything. So Matthew, his student, and I we threw out a bunch of concepts. I had a whole bunch of ideas. I sort of toyed with the idea of writing before, and we came up with this concept. And he and I spent about a year writing this thing, and Michael was overseeing it. His name's Michael Nolan. And a production company in Canada optioned it. They ended up holding the option for like 2.5 years, which was great because it got out to a few people and we managed to put a sizzle reel together. We put a whole promo thing together for it. But the option lapsed in like April, I think it was. And Matthew and I have been spending the last few months rewriting it, just really honing it. I think it's a much better script now even. And so the next step is putting it out there again into the world. I'm really happy with it. It would also be something for me to direct. I would probably, I don't have to be the lead role, but it was sort of me writing a role for myself, right? But my priority would be to direct. I really would love to direct. I've directed a short film. I co-directed, they say, sort of co-directed. I directed another short film with a friend of mine, and I love it. I love it. I love directing. So it's kind of a mother-daughter concept. It's female driven, and I think it's a really, really powerful story. So we'll see what happens with that. And I have a couple of other things that I'm playing around with, concepts that I'm playing. One is a kind of a reality show, and one is more of a family themed movie script. And also there's a movie that has been offered to me that would shoot at the end of July, end of this month. So we'll see how that unfolds. It's I don't know. You never know until you're sitting on the set actually shooting. So we'll see what happens with that.
Well, good luck to all of them. And if you do them, we'd love to have you back and talk about them as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, over time, I've kept pretty busy, doing bits and pieces here and there, but loving it.
Well, just curious now, before we let you go, also, how often do you go back and watch some of your earlier films, and what goes through your mind when you
do? Some of them are really cringeworthy, I feel like. But for the most part, it's fun to go back. My brother in Edmonton, where I grew up, he just retired, actually, like a couple of days ago was his last day. But he was running this science center called Tellus World of Science in Edmonton. And they have one of those big IMAX movie theaters. And he had this idea of doing a whole series of sci-fi movies, screening them in the IMAX theater. So the first movie he did I think it was called Sci-Fi in the Summer, or something like that. The first movie was The Last Starfighter. So Lance and I went up to Edmonton and did, a little Q&A and a one-on-one thing, and we watched The Last Starfighter on IMAX. Oh my God, it was fantastic. I mean, I saw stuff that I'd never seen before. I mean, it really played well on IMAX.
Wow.
And, there's been enough time that I'm so sort of, I hate to say proud because that sounds like, oh, you see, but I was I'm so proud. But it's fun watching it and going, oh, that was so cute, that did work. I get it now. I get that. And it's fun watching Night of the Comet. When I saw Night of the Comet the first time, I was like, oh no, not like that. But now I watch it, I'm like, you know what? That did what it needed to do. I think that was a good job. I'm proud of myself. And also so grateful to have been a part of it, these movies that I think are kind of special in their little way.
Mm. Well, you mentioned fan conventions. How often do you do them, and do you have any upcoming?
I am doing something in November in Mexico called, it has something, I'm really good at this, aren't I? I'm such a businesswoman. It's something like on the beach or something like that, and it involves, it's always an 80s themed thing with a lot of music, and then they bring actors from the 80s. You interviewed Diane Franklin, I know.
Yes.
She's been doing them for years, and she called me up years ago actually and said, "You ought to do this thing. Wouldn't you like to do it?" And I was like, "I guess so." But I have somebody who represents me, so it always has to go through him first. But that's the next thing I'll be doing. In fact, somehow she found out I was doing it, and she texted me immediately. "Oh, I see you're doing blah, blah, blah." And she was so excited. Let me see if I can let everybody know exactly what it's called, because thank goodness for iPhones and things. Let's see. This is so bad. The Sands. It's called The Sands, and you can look it up at its the website is The Sands, www.thesands.rocks, and then / the best artist lineup or whatever. Yeah, the sands.rocks. Look that up.
What is it? What dates is it? What dates are those?
Yeah, November 6th through November 11th. So yeah, check it out because it looks like it's really super fun. I'm not sure who all is going to be there. I know Pat Benatar is playing, which I'm very excited about. Yeah, it to me it sounds sort of like one of those cruise things, except it's in a resort in Mexico. So I'm
even better.
That's what I'm doing as far as I know next. I mean, something might come up in between then, but I do maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 a year maybe, which is fine. It's great. I enjoy them. I love meeting the people. They always treat you great. So yeah. I love meeting everybody at conventions, and I try to keep everybody updated on Facebook.
That's what we're going to ask. How can fans follow you on social media? Facebook,
Catherine Mary Stewart. Instagram, Catherine Mary Stewart. I'm on Twitter. The handle is CMS, as in Catherine Mary Stewart .ALL. But I think if you put hashtag Catherine Mary Stewart, I'll probably come up. I also have a website. I just finally rebuilt my website. It's catherinemarystewart.com. And you can also find a fan section where you can see photographs and things like that. And I have a newsletter that I put out, and I'm trying to keep everybody up to date with all the latest and greatest. I'll post this on my website, and I'll post it everywhere. So I encourage people to check that out.
Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure. We're both big fans. Love your movies, and it was such a treat to get to speak with you.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, again, I'm Jonathan Rosen with Ike Eisenmann. This has been Pop Culture Retro. And again, a very special thanks to Catherine Mary Stewart. And please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.